because I have been following you for quite a while, and I've learned a lot from you about it, the whole concept of the esoteric spirituality, or what this is all about. But I've
Yeah.
never really spoken to you about esoteric astrology.
Right.
And I just, before we go into that, just tell me a little bit about you and about, were you always into this as a child? I mean, what called you into studying the esoteric?
Oh, good question. Well, I became very interested in spirituality when I was a teenager, and if a certain set of variables happened in my life where I decided to learn to meditate, and I was 16 years old at that time. And so I started with transcendental meditation, and I did that for many years. And then, but in my 20s, I started, reading Buddhism and did a lot of metaphysical types of things. But eventually, I discovered the writings of Alice Bailey and Theosophy. And it really, once I discovered that, it was like coming home. And so
Really?
from my mid-20s onward, I would say that that's been the focal point of my life. I didn't know that I would do astrology. In fact, to be my main work is not esoteric astrology. My main work is the whole philosophy. Esoteric astrology is a sliver or a section within a much larger philosophy. So I learned the philosophy, but never in a million years did I think that I'd ever do the astrology portion of it. That happened through a set of circumstances where basically I was starting to teach the philosophy, and I weave in some elements of esoteric astrology into it. And then people would say, well, would you do a reading for me? And I kind of begrudgingly said, oh, I guess I could try. And then another person, and then finally it just kind of grew to the point where it became a significant aspect of my work, even though to this day I don't see it as the primary, but
Yeah.
I do, several hundred readings a year. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting, isn't it? I always feel like, astrology calls us.
yeah,
We,
yeah,
we kind of, and I think the esoteric teachings call us too. I think there's an element of that, because it's not for everyone, I
yeah.
would say. But then there's this sort of, it's sort of, it's so meaty, isn't it?
Yes, it's very, that's why I like it. It's so comprehensive. It's
Yeah.
just amazing. And yeah. And so that's esoteric astrology is really all about the evolution of the soul's consciousness over the vastness of time, and how every incarnation adds an element of understanding that next step in one's journey.
Yeah. I mean, just want to just wheel with you back before we just really start exploring all of this. Were your parents into this? Were you the kind of the odd one out in the family, or how did that all play out?
Oh my goodness, you're asking a loaded question there. No, my parents were. I was raised sort of from a spiritual perspective as sort of mainstream Lutheran. I'm originally from the Minneapolis, Minnesota area, and I was raised in that environment. I have three brothers. All of them are younger than I. They all went on a whole different path. They all kind of became much more fundamentalist Christians, and while they were being fundamentalists, I was doing TM and meditating, and so it was like two worlds.
Yeah.
Or yeah. But then yeah. So, but I never took my teenage years. I didn't put a lot of emphasis on the church at all. I just kind of went through the motions. But as I say, once I started meditating on my own, then everything started to open up. So.
It's interesting, isn't it? There is, it really, I'm so curious about those of us who are called to this. So
Mhm.
curious about why, and do you feel like you've incarnated into this lifetime carrying the knowledge, and that you had no other choice apart from to become a teacher?
Yeah, I do. I think that I mean, I didn't even know I was supposed to be a teacher until I discovered it when I was in the business world, because I started in business and in corporations. And an odd opening came for me where I discovered that I had an opportunity to do some teaching within a business context. And that's when I discovered how natural and easy it was to teach. And that changed my life. And so then I studied psychology and started teaching psychology at in an academic environment. But all along, I was reading and studying esotericism. And when I found the Alice Bailey writings, particularly, it was sort of so familiar to me that it was. I do have a sense that I've been exposed to this in a previous life, and so now I'm just recapturing it and sharing it more fully with the outer world.
Yeah, I've thought that about you too.
You did.
I certainly have. So
Yeah.
let's get into the whole concept of astrology, because in my understanding of esoteric astrology, which isn't a lot, it is a different format, although you're still using the same basic details as somebody's chart to draw it up. But it has different themes, and I understand that the moon is more important. The moon and the rising sign is more important than the sun. Is that true?
Um, I don't think I would say that. I would. They're all big. They're all important. Like in most astrology, the big three are sun, moon, and ascendant. But it's their role that they play in the larger drama of life that is important. In a certain sense, you could argue that the rising sign is the clue to the soul's purpose, in its higher meaning, not in its traditional meaning. Its traditional meaning, as I'm sure you know, represents persona, how you appear. But from an esoteric point of view, the rising sign has been long understood as having a much higher meaning, but only for people that have awakened or have some measure of awakening to their own causal body, their own soul consciousness. So that's one of the big distinctions about this is a person yet on the path or not? If they're not, then traditional astrology is absolutely suitable. But if they are, then esoteric astrology is going to weave in some deeper principles. And one of them has to do with how the rising sign is understood. Yeah. And the sun, though, the sun in astrology, yes, you could argue that it's personality based, but I would say it this way, that the sun is the symbol of identity, regardless of its identity as personality, its identity as soul, and even higher than that, identity as pure monad. Because remember, in this philosophy, it's understood that there are three structures within us that are self-based. There's our day-to-day consciousness, personality. There's the consciousness of the soul that we're striving to recognize and live more. But even beyond that, in an unconscious realm, way beyond our ability, is something called the monad, which is pure spirit. And so the sun can represent all levels of identity.
I'm just wondering, I read somewhere that for esoteric astrology, and do correct me if I'm wrong here, it's almost like the sun has to be tamed so that it can work with the rising sign. The rising sign is the expression of the soul, and the sun is the personality. But it's sort of like when they work together, then the soul can truly express itself. Does that make sense to you?
In a way, but let me try to phrase that a bit differently. For the purposes of this context, let's say see the sun as both the symbol of the soul and the personality, and that you might say lower sun and higher sun. Okay, now imagine that there's the rising sign has a lower meaning. That's the traditional way of looking at it, and it has an esoteric meaning. That's its higher soulful way of looking at it. So the way to understand it is we're trying to lift our consciousness from the self as personality, or I should say the sun as personality, to the sun as soul. But the way we do that is via the higher meaning of the rising sign. So it's like two levels of the sun, two levels of self, and the higher meaning of the rising sign facilitates the movement of your consciousness from the lower sun to the higher sun, from the personality to the soul. And that higher meaning of the rising sign is the gateway that can lift you there.
Okay, so that's the journey, is to go from the lower soul to the higher expression of that.
From the personality to the soul, that's the journey. That's right.
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
is lower sun to higher sun in a way.
Yeah, okay. So and we have to talk about the rays, obviously, because that's such a heart of the esoteric teachings. How does the rays play a role in esoteric astrology?
Okay, great question, big question too. First, let me just say that the 7 rays are just so fundamental to esotericism, and it is understood that the rays play through the astrology. For instance, there are 7 rays, and each of those rays come into our zodiacal world through 3 signs of the zodiac. So every ray finds an access point through 3 signs, but that each sign will condition that ray in a little bit different way. So some signs, their most fundamental ray nature, it might be just 1 ray. Some signs, many signs, have 2 rays as their kind of core background vibration, and there are a couple that have 3.
I've just noticed that at Capricorn and Leo
Yeah,
and Sagittarius
for what? No,
having
so
more than just have more than 1 ray expression.
Sagittarius and Capricorn, not Leo. Leo
Oh,
has
not
only
Leo.
no, but Sagittarius is got 3 rays, rays 4, 5, and 6, and Capricorn has 1, 3, and 7. That's right. Yeah,
And then from what I see is Aquarius only has 1 ray.
that's right. That's right.
Why do some have more expression than others then?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that, other than to say that it's been long understood within the philosophy. But keep in mind, though, that what gives added richness to it and variability to it is that the ruling planets that are under each sign also are living entities, and they too have a soul ray that governs their nature. Actually, they have both a soul ray and a personality ray. So as an example, if I look at the planet Mercury, its personality ray is the 3rd ray. So if I interpret Mercury in a usual way, like most astrologers would do, I would be thinking about it from a 3rd ray perspective. If I'm with somebody that is looking at, I can tell that they're on the path, I would be looking at that planet and its position both from a 3rd ray and a 4th ray position. The 4th ray is the soul nature of Mercury. So I'm just giving you one example.
Oh, interesting, isn't it?
Even though a sign itself, in its most fundamental background energy, might be 1, 2, or 3 rays, the ruling planets that represent that sign can be of a whole different origin. So in the case of Aquarius, Aquarius is a 5th ray sign. That's the ray of science. It's no wonder that science is the institution that's surging forward at this time in history. But its traditional ruler, well, the ruler we usually use today is Uranus. And Uranus is 7th ray, but it has a higher ruler. And you got to remember that there's the traditional ruler and the esoteric ruler. And the higher ruler is Jupiter in Aquarius, and Jupiter is a 2nd ray planet. So here we have, in a certain sense, we could say the age of Aquarius has 3 major rays that are playing out. There's the 5th ray, that's the kind of broad sweeping ray. And then there's the 7th ray and the 2nd ray are largely connected to this as well.
And the 2nd ray is about love and wisdom.
That's right.
And
That's right.
And did you say the 7th ray?
7th ray is that's the soul ray of Uranus.
And that's the the overarching theme is order and magic.
Yeah, and practical mysticism.
And practical mysticism. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Mm.
So I'm just curious because I'm a traditional astrologer, not and I'm just wondering about how esoteric astrology sort of felt when, you know, with Pluto moving into Aquarius and leaving behind the Capricornic energy, which was different, into the age of Aquarius. How did you interpret that then? Or do you interpret it? Because obviously it's not setting into Aquarius until the end of the year.
Yeah, it's still in process. That's right.
Yeah, very much so.
A good example would be when I think about when years ago. What was it? 2008, I think it was, when Pluto stepped into Capricorn, and that's when that it was just about the same time that that whole financial world crisis took place, where there was such a shakeup in the financial markets around the world.
Yeah.
I thought to myself at that time, I thought, whoa, Pluto doesn't waste time. Uh, but as it goes into Aquarius, there's lots of ways to interpret it. It depends. But for instance, Pluto is a first ray planet, so that's will and power,
Mm.
and it has a shake-up effect. So it can shake up, it can shake things up. But this time, what we have to be careful with is that because it's Aquarius is group, it can actually have a shake-up effect on group activity, and it could be understood as a shake-up revealing shadow issues, because Pluto is sometimes called the dredger. It dredges up shadow issues and says, hey, you might want to look at this. Well, society groups, spiritual groups, have to be very careful as we have Pluto going into Aquarius, because we might find some shadow issues within groups themselves that become exposed.
Gosh, that's interesting, isn't it? I mean, and also all the technology, the AI that's coming up, but also this sort of sense of, as you say, the group dynamic, Aquarius, social justice, all of those themes. But
Yep.
I love the way that the rays add a sort of a different dimension, a sort of, as it's a deeper, it's more colorful, I'll put it that way.
Yeah, yeah. And it also offers, well, the esoteric astrology in general offers a less monolithic approach, because two people could have the same chart, born at the same time, same place. One's not on the path yet, one's clearly on the path yet. And so one of the beauties of esoteric astrology is that it has built into it a hierarchical representation of everything, so that you can't just interpret one thing one way. There's levels of interpretation according to where that person is on the journey of evolution itself.
Okay, so you've mentioned this a couple of times already about identifying people who are on the journey, and you would read their chart differently. So can you just tell me a little bit more about that, and what do you mean by, how do you interpret when somebody's on the journey or on the path or not on the path?
Well, it's a great question, and there's a sort of a two or three ways I look at that. One is when I meet somebody and I'm doing a reading, within the first few minutes, I'm in the back of my mind, I'm just trying to gauge this person and sense, are they thinking of life from a spiritual perspective or not? And it's not a judgment, it's simply getting a sense of where I need to approach their reading from. Now, most of the time I get people that are on the path because they're interested in the larger system I teach. But occasionally I get somebody that it's clearly they're not on the path, and then I have to put on my traditional astrology cap. Um, but that doesn't happen that often. But the other thing I do, though, to make it easier, is that there's also where on the path, how far on the path, and that's not so easy when you don't know people deeply. So what I sometimes will do is, often I'll talk to somebody about some, let's say they have I don't know, I'm just going to make this up. Let's say they have um, uh, uh, something's going on in Taurus, something, let's say Jupiter's in Taurus or something like that. Well, I might um, show them a range of possibilities, where how it might represent something on a very traditional level, but how it might seem you can have a higher interpretation of it. So I give them the whole range so that they can then place themselves in it, because I don't know them well enough
Yeah.
I can intuit generally, are they on the path yet? But I need to spend much more time with somebody to get a sense of maybe where on the path they are. And
Yeah. So just give me an example. Let's just take Jupiter and Taurus as an example. So the lower vibe of that, and then the higher vibe of that.
well, I mean, on the lower vibe, that can represent an expansion of materialistic interests. Taurus on a traditional level has so much to do with comfort and things
Eating a
and
lot.
yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
Jupiter just can create an expansive quality around that. On the other hand, Jupiter in Taurus on a much higher level could be understood as, well, first understand that on a higher level, Taurus is the great sign of the light bringer, but it has a lot to do with revealing the light hidden within form. And so because Jupiter is a second-ray planet, it can represent an opportunity to bring a tremendous amount of love and wisdom into the forms they create in the outer world to make a difference and to uplift humanity. So it's a much higher interpretation.
That's the whole different thing, isn't it? I mean, that's just, yeah, that's just a lovely explanation of the lower form, which we're all living out, and then transforming that into something which has much more, it's about service, I think, isn't it? That's what we're talking about.
In the end, it's all about service. You know, the third law of the soul, this law, there are 5 functional laws of the soul, and the third one is the law of service. Every human soul wants to work through the personality. It needs to get the personality out of the way, and there's the challenge. And in so doing, it wants to make an uplifting contribution to the betterment of something beyond oneself, and that's service. And in a way, esoteric astrology is trying to create a language that helps people recognize that in themselves.
Yeah. So you said there were 5 levels. So would you just mind just going through them?
Sure. So the first one is called, they're laws. They're called the 5 laws. The first one is called the law of sacrifice. These are laws of the soul. They're laws inherent within the causal body itself. The law of sacrifice is the first one. The second one is called the law of magnetic impulse. The third is the law of service.
Can you just explain that a bit more, magnetic impulse?
The law of magnetic impulse has to do with the laws governing the soul's relationship to its inner group. The laws, you know, your soul is part of an inner ashram. And so that law has a lot to do with inner group relations. It has many other things, but that's a good way of understanding it. Inner group relations, relationships between souls in and out of incarnation at the same time. Those group relations, those sorts of things. It's a very important law in terms of, it's a very second-ray kind of law, having to do with a right relationship in all things, to seek out right relationship in all things. The third law is the law of service, as I mentioned. Fourth law is surprising. It's called the law of repulse, the law of repulse. And that has a lot to do with cultivating the ability to repulse that which is not in conformity with the higher unity that you sense. So it is said that the law of repulse is actually a sub-law of the law of attraction. It's sort of like, it's not repulse in the sense of pushing something away because you just don't want anything to do with it. It means pushing something away that needs to be adjusted so that it can integrate more into a higher unity, you see. And a lot of it is in ourselves. So it's like repulsing some of our lower tendencies within our personality until they are adjusted so that they can integrate into the consciousness of the soul, as an example, you see. So that's the law of repulse. And the last one is the fifth one is called the law of group progress, And that's very much a strong one as we go into the Aquarian age, as you can imagine. The laws governing what constitutes real group, because there's lower group and higher group, you know, and you could have, you know, you look at gang mentality. That's Aquarian. That's Aquarian, you know.
There's
So
a lot
it's
of
lower
going on at the moment, isn't there?
Yeah.
But
So
then I'm waiting for the transformation. Do you as a esoteric teacher, do you believe that everyone is on the path on some level?
Yes, but not everybody is conscious yet of being on the path on some level. So in a way, this philosophy tends to use the word the path. We often refer to it as after a person has had their awakening. That is to say, for the first time in some incarnation, they awaken to their higher soulful promptings more consciously within. Prior to that, for thousands of lifetimes, it's lower self only being developed. Soul is in the background, but you're not conscious of it. And one could argue that that's also part of the path, and in a way it is. But oftentimes we define the path in a more, at that place where you have this conscious realization of your own duality. You sense a higher part of yourself and your day-to-day consciousness, and that begins what we would call the path in a more formal way.
That's so, yes, and I call it the calling.
Okay, yeah, the calling, sure.
I'm just curious then, as an astrologer, how would you recognize which of the 5 laws the person is particularly resonating to, or are they resonating to all of them and one is stronger than the other?
No, I don't think about these laws so much in the astrology work. They represent laws, no matter what ray you're on, they are just unfolding patterns that are inherent within the causal body itself over time. When I'm looking at astrology, I'm much more focusing on the nature of the higher and lower archetypal patterns of planets and signs, and trying to gauge it according to who I'm speaking to, you know.
Okay, so esoteric astrology has to involve, I imagine, reincarnation.
Oh, sure.
Okay, so how do you address this? What do you look for in a chart when you're, and do you bring the concept of reincarnation into every reading that you do?
No, no. I mean, I when I say I should reword this. The emphasis of the esoteric philosophy is that there's such a thing as reincarnation, but I don't particularly dwell upon that in astrology. Although there are times when it comes up, and I'll try to address it. There's 3 things that point in view that point to the past, therefore point to potentially some patterns that are from a previous incarnation. One is the moon, and the moon is considered a symbol of the past for a variety of reasons. One would be the south node, and the third would be the IC point, you know, the cusp of the 4th house. Those all represent symbols of the past. And so I would look at those signs, let's say whatever the sign it is, and I might even consider the ray. So for instance, as an example in my own chart, Taurus is the IC point at the actually 0 degrees Taurus at the bottom of the chart. And Taurus is a 4th ray sign. So even though I don't have a lot of 4th ray in me in this incarnation that is part of my constitution, the truth is that I seem to have some legacy qualities of the 4th ray that are there already, and so it kind of fits in my own experience, that even though I'm not a 4th ray person in this incarnation, I have some elements of it that seem quite natural and easy, that I can access if I need to, and that's because it's more legacy quality from a previous life. But it's speculation, you understand. It's speculation.
Yeah, of course, but that's the ray of harmony through conflict, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's also the ray of the arts and culture. You know, I used to be a singer, and used to do a lot of dancing and so forth in my teens, and so those were really very 4th ray qualities. But I don't do much of that anymore. But nonetheless, in those, it was sort of, it's a kind of recapitulation. I don't know if you know that term. Do you know the term recapitulation?
Yeah, yeah.
So in a way, early on in the first few years of your life, you will tend to recapitulate certain patterns from the past, and to reintegrate those patterns, but also to make sure that the lessons learned in the past have been held as you move into the new
Yeah.
incarnation.
And they're kind of ticked off and they're kind of done, but you've learned from them.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes, okay. So I just had a brilliant a question I was going to ask you, and it's gone right out of my head.
It'll come back. It'll come back.
It'll come back. So yes, I want to talk to you more about the moon then.
Okay.
And the whole concept of the moon representing the past. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. So the moon in esoteric astrology symbolizes the instinctual past, some of which we have to rise above. The Tibetan, the author of the Alice Bailey writings, says that when you're on the path and awake, the moon can often symbolize the prison of the soul, because it can represent certain instinctual tendencies that can defeat the soul from being more effective. It's as if because they're instinctual, the soul has difficulty getting a grip on it. And so some of the real work on the path is to handle the problem of the moon in one's chart. Now, there's a whole occult mythology around why the moon is so much related to the past. Without getting into the whole story, it's an ancient story, but it's called the Moon Chain Disaster. And it's a fascinating story about the history of the moon from an occult perspective. But to make it simple and easy, let's put it this way. Occultism would say that the moon that we see out there now, that moon is the carcass of our Earth's last incarnation. Because our Earth is a being. It's an entity, and it has a soul. It has a second-ray soul and a third-ray personality. Our Earth, as an entity, went through a crisis in the mythology billions of years ago that led to what is called in the occult literature the Moon Chain Disaster. But it's the root of what various philosophies and religious origin stories of cultures around the world talk about the fall. It's rooted in the original fall, you might say. Having said that, so the moon is said to be the carcass of our Earth's last incarnation. And why it's an obstacle is because so often the problems of humanity are our habitual relationship to the past. In other words, in many ways, the crisis of the world today is rooted in an over-attachment to old thought forms and the inability to transform them to new paradigms. And so we're, in a way, the greatest enemy to the future are the habits of the past. Well, the greatest enemies to our own evolution are the habitual tendencies that prevent that positive movement, and they are symbolized by the moon in the chart.
Gosh, okay, so let's take an example. Moon in Virgo. Let's say moon in Virgo, 9th house. What would you, without seeing the whole chart, I know it's really difficult, but just as an archetype, what would you say about that? Just to give me an idea.
That's exactly mine. I've got moon in Virgo in the 9th house. Well done, well done. Yeah. But see, the moon, it's actually a tricky one for you to ask, because in Virgo, well, let me just say, for instance, that I told you that there are tiers of rulers. So the traditional ruler of Virgo, as you know, is Mercury.
Yes.
But the esoteric ruler of Virgo, the esoteric ruler is not Mercury. The esoteric ruler is actually the moon itself, the moon. And in that context, it's symbolizing the urge to purify form. See, because the moon can also represent just form itself. But so back to your question, though. So the moon as a negative force in Virgo is going to have a lot to do with some of the challenges around Virgo energy, overly critical thinking, always work before play, preoccupation with crossing the T's, dotting the I's, and maybe a distrust of intuition.
And being right.
And yes, and being right as well. That's right. That's right. So that would be a lower tendency.
Yeah.
And then, but a higher tendency would be that it has to do with the purification of your form nature, so that the soul can express itself through the form more effectively. That's why Virgo is the great sign of purification, and to Virgo, virgin, purity. But it takes the moon in its higher symbolism. It happens to be in Virgo, and it has to do with the purified form.
Yeah.
So you chose the sign that's probably the not the best example. If you would have given me another moon sign, I could have done it differently for you.
Let's do moon in Capricorn.
Moon in Capricorn. Okay, so moon in Capricorn.
House.
Very similar. Let's use something, because that's similar. Capricorn and Virgo.
Oh, okay. What about Cancer?
Okay, moon in Cancer. So moon in Cancer, the moon is its traditional ruler, and you can see that playing out in some of the negative qualities of Cancer: oversensitivity, kind of fearful of getting out there in the world,
Yeah.
a tendency to be, um, in a way, there's a fearfulness associated with it. Uh,
Mm.
but it's high.
Overprotective.
But
Yeah.
so that has to be transformed, and the higher ruler of Cancer is actually Neptune, and Neptune is the Christ. And so it has to do with, in many ways, the Christ energy is incredibly strong in Cancer on a higher level because of the Neptune influence. And so we want to transform those lower tendencies of the moon as it pertains to Cancer, and we want to transform them into the a more Neptunian loving expansive quality. So for instance,
Oh,
I always tell people that are, when I work with Cancerian people, that even though Cancer is so much about the home and the nest, when you're on the path, which is moon, but when you're on the path, you want to redefine what home is and
mm.
realize that it isn't the four walls you live in. Instead, it's to see the whole life as if it were your home. And so it creates a more loving, expansive quality to what constitutes home. And that every department of a person's life, their career, their friendships, their interests, all of those are like larger rooms in this larger house that is the
Yeah.
fullness of a person's life, you see?
House of the
Yeah.
universe, everything. Gosh, that's so interesting. So tell me, why does esoteric astrology use such different rulers then?
Well,
Because
because
oh,
it's got higher and lower rulers. There's even a hierarchical rulers level that is representing what the masters are experiencing with the signs. But so there's really three layers. There's the traditional rulers,
mm.
there are the esoteric rulers, and then there are the hierarchical rulers. So the hierarchical rulers are way beyond us.
Oh,
Uh,
okay. But
um,
so just for me to be clear, so let's take Aries as an example. Aries normally ruled by Mars, that's the traditional,
right.
but it's also esoterically it's ruled by Mercury.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So why Mercury?
Okay, that's a great question. So let's look at Aries. Let's talk about that. Okay, so Aries ruled by the Mars. Mars is the warrior, but Mars is very much about emotion. In fact, Mars rules the solar plexus. So um, one of the things that I remember learning about Aries many years ago was that I learned something about rams. The ram. Did you know that rams are nearly blind in real life?
No.
Yeah, they can't see. And I thought, well, that's telling, ramming blindly towards some objective.
Yes.
And so that's the Mars quality. So Mars charges forward, but with relative blindness, whereas Mercury is a sacred planet. Mars is a non-sacred planet. And Mercury is Hermes, the messenger of the gods. And that's what Aries is really about in its higher nature. When you're on the path and you're in Aries, Aries tries to cultivate a sensitivity to the new paradigms that are cresting on the shores of humanity and to be a voice in support of those new and emerging paradigms. So Aries spiritually is very progressive. There's a pioneering quality to it, and it's a visionary quality to it, and it requires Mercury to be the source of that
Mm,
vision. And you
mm.
see,
The
um,
messenger of the gods.
yeah, and that's why, all the signs of the zodiac have sacred mantras. And the one for Aries goes like this. This is the soul speaking in Aries. I come forth, and from the plane of mind, I rule. Or reworded, I, my higher consciousness, I, the best in me, I, the soul itself, come forth. And from the power of my mind, I rule my creative expression. So Aries has nothing to do with ruling people. It has to do with ruling what you must do to bring some new and innovative idea into the world that has uplifting value to humanity. That's what Aries is about. But you have to rise. So when I work with Aries people, I ask them a question: what do you use when you have a new idea? What do you use to propel that idea forward? Are you going to use Mars, or are you going to use Mercury? If you're going to use Mars, it's going to be a more blind charge. If you're going to use Mercury, it's much more related to the throat and the crown than the solar plexus. And then you're going to have a much more wise, visionary, tempered approach to how to bring something into the world more successfully.
So it's kind of force versus wisdom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could look at it that
Yeah.
way. Sure.
Yeah.
You could look at it that way.
It's so interesting. It's so different. I'm just thinking about what we could give people, which would be really, oh yes, that's what I wanted to do. Just talk about more about the esoteric level of the rising sign, and would it be okay just to kind of just go through them quite quickly? So it's just so that people are reading this, they can actually go, oh, that's me.
Oh, you mean to give you the higher meaning of each of the signs of the zodiac? Is that what you're saying?
Or just is it possible? I know, I mean, I know, you know, this is a huge amount of learning and for people to do, but is there anything that just a taster of looking at the rising sign and just saying, well, this, the higher level of this would be this?
Oh, yes, but it would, I could do that and I'd be happy to. It's just that it would be so short
Yeah.
with a much larger again. But so we could start with Aries. Aries is the sign that's all about launching the new paradigms.
Yes.
Taurus is a sign that has much to do with the to revealing sacred light through form. Gemini is Gemini has a lot to do with this, the cultivation and the establishment of the Antakarana, the building of the Antakarana deep within, because Gemini is related to communications, and Antakarana is the communication bridge between the soul and personality. Cancer has a lot to do with widening the perspective of what constitutes home, like I mentioned. Leo is all about inwardly the inward journey to find one's authentic self. Virgo has so much to do with the manifestation of the purification of form so that spirit can more effectively express through form. Libra has a lot to do with the importance of seeking out right relationship in all things. Scorpio has a lot to do with the transformation of the shadow as a function of moving forward in evolution. Sagittarius is all about aspiration and visioning the next, sensing the correct direction and aspiring toward it without waver, with steadiness of aim.
Steady. Oh, I love that, the steadiness of aim.
Yeah, because so many Sagittarian people, they're shooting arrows all over the place. As the Tibetan in the Alice Bailey writing says, he says something like, the Sagittarian disciple must learn to become the one-pointed disciple. Sort of like going right to a vision, not to the right of it, not to the left of it, but right to the vision, and in a way, become the vision itself. Become the arrow itself. Become the arrow.
That's a toughie. I've got Sagittarius rising. I know about that.
Yeah, well, it's, you know, and you probably know that the arrows that the archer is shooting have a name in mythology. They're called the arrows of aspiration.
Yes.
And so Sagittarius is about aspiring toward, visioning of, aiming at. Let's put it this way, Sue, what's the point of being an archer if you're not going to shoot at something? Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
So let's go to Capricorn.
Capricorn is all about, on a spiritual level, it's about spiritual achievement, and it rules initiation.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, rules initiation. And there's quite a story about Capricorn. It gets a bad rap in traditional astrology, but esoterically, it's powerful. Then where am I at? Oh, Aquarius. So Aquarius has so much to do with it's similar to Aries in that it too is a sign that's cultivating a sensitivity to the new paradigms that are trying to present themselves in the world. The difference between Aries and Aquarius is this: the Aquarian disciple says, I see the new idea, I sense the new paradigm, and I want to bring it into the world, and I would prefer doing it in a collaborative way. The Aries disciple says, I see the new paradigm, I want to bring it into the world, and I'll do it by myself if I have to. That's the difference.
I love that.
Yeah, that's the
And then
difference.
we have lovely Pisces.
Pisces is Pisces is amazing because it's the sign. It's the one of the other signs that is most Christ-filled. I put Pisces and Cancer as the most Christ-filled, but they manifest the Christ principle differently. In Cancer, it often manifests as nurturing, supportive love, while in Pisces, it often manifests as sacrificial love.
Mm.
And by the way, when I use the word Christ, I don't mean it in a Christian sense, of course.
Yeah, of course.
So, that's why it is said that sometimes there's a bit of a rescue quality to Pisces. It's been called the sign of the saving force. There's a sense it cultivates a loving sensitivity to where there's suffering in the world, where people are falling through the cracks because of the imperfections of society. And yet there's a realization no one can be left behind. It's one humanity. The last weary pilgrim must come home.
Yeah.
And so Cancer is very Cancer and Virgo, Cancer and Pisces are both very much Christ-like, but they hold that Christ differently. Now, some Piscean people, though, don't go the way, what I call the way of the saving force. Some of them go the way of creative expression. Many artists come out of Pisces because it does cultivate greater sensitivity to color and texture and beauty and that sort of thing.
And I think this sense of connecting with the collective. There's
Oh,
a
yes,
downloading quality to a lot of Pisceans, isn't there?
that's right. That's right.
Now, William, how can people find you and to learn more about you and also perhaps if they would like to have an astrology reading with you?
Well, you go to my website, and the address, the easiest address is just my last name, meader.org, O-R-G, meader.org. And you won't find much on astrology there. I've been doing astrology for a long time, but it's not my main work. My main work is the whole philosophy. But if under Contact Us, there is a contact for astrology appointments, and my assistant handles all of that. I do it via Zoom. Unless I'm in your country, then I do them live. I'll be coming to your country, by the way, very
I
soon.
know. I
Yeah.
know. I'm not going to be able to see you this time, which is such a shame.
Oh, okay.
Is there, what else would you like to sort of say to wrap up your experience of working as an esoteric astrologer, or anything that you want to say to people about, this is really can help you to understand the higher calling that you may be experiencing?
Yeah, so esoteric astrology is most suitable for people that have awoken to their own higher consciousness in some measure. And the goal of esoteric astrology is to help them understand the dynamics of consciousness between their higher and lower self as revealed within a chart, and therefore help them to recognize how does the soul want to pattern the nature of consciousness, and also how may the lower self get in the way, and what can be done to transform those lunar tendencies that are getting in the way in the process. And in the end, though, it's all about how to understand your life's journey as a servant on behalf of the upliftment of something beyond yourself. That's what it's really about.
That will do. Wonderful
Okay.
place to end.